welcome everyone. I arrived in the session around lunch and we have lots of session around lending. We are kind of odd one out session. We are around payments. But we strongly believe payments and credit worlds are linked and they are getting more and more linked. So I think we are at the right room and we have the right panel to speak about right from Anirban, Amrish, Mahendra and Gautam, kind of cover the entire spectrum of payment world. And before I open up for conversation, I want to just give some insight. Some of this would be probably pretty obvious, but just want to start our conversation that, like all the discussion we have around AI, data is the core platform. And payment data has been one of the richest source of insights for consumers and businesses because this is largely real time. It is also available at scale, and especially if we talk about India as a market, there's one area where we have actually built population scale products like UPI and cards, which are being adopted at scale. So, we have the foundation set. On top of it, we also have, the most of the payment data also carry lots of additional data about the underlying transactions, which essentially lead to commerce. So the payment ecosystem also are deeply connected to commerce. And commerce affects a large set of people in the society and economy. Last but not the least, I think payment was the one large application which have made Indian believe in technology more because we are using on a day-to-day basis. So I think with all that, the background, I think building AI use cases using payments data or use cases around payments is a very, very, I would say, viable use case for this technology called AI, which has been around. And incidentally, already AI is being used in payments. It's not a new use case. It's just that as the technology becomes cheaper, more and more compute capabilities are available, new use cases are emerging. So to begin with, I'll have an open questions and probably I'll go ahead with Anirban first. Especially AI has been used in payments for long, even though probably in not so many areas the way we are using now. But given your background in payments and running a large operations, where do you see, in terms of transaction efficiency or things like frauds, which we keep hearing, some of, use cases which you have seen are in action. You want to talk about it?
Sure. Great to be here. I'll talk about, at a high level, it is about prevention of fraud, making transactions more efficient. It's about far better service. But it's also about the new economy that Gen AI will itself create. And how do you manage payments in that world? I'll touch upon, just start with fraud, and then we can go around and talk. So look, if you think about commerce, even 100 years ago, my grandmother would go buy something in a shop where she trusts the shopkeeper and would pay in hard cash. Trust is that foundation of that relationship. Now you're trying to replicate trust across millions of users and millions of merchants in a digital setting, right? The core to great digital commerce is just trust. When we have, and I see this in the data, when somebody has a bad experience with UPI, they go back they don't use digital again. They get off that digital bandwagon. And so engendering trust is one of the most fundamental things we always think about as payment companies. As more real-time payments happen in the world, and UPI is half of the world's real-time payments, but the whole world will get there, trust is the foundation. Trust is what has to be strengthened, right? You just read about how much frauds go up. And trust to me is where we've seen some amazing use cases using Gen AI. Look, payments and fraud risk management has always used AI. It's from 1980s that people have been using some version of machine learning. It gets much more powerful now. One of the things we have worked on, for example, is this use case of figuring out, is this merchant actually selling groceries or e-commerce, or are they doing something else that they shouldn't be doing? And LLMs are very useful, as good as the best fraud agent. They augment the best fraud agents, and as good as the average fraud agent in terms of figuring out what is the merchant's actual line of business? Are they doing something that is not kosher? And it's just amazing use cases coming out of that. Same on the customer side. You can help figure out whether this is a transaction that a customer, let's say Gautam here, will actually be doing, given all his transaction patterns. And you can use as much data as possible to make that signal stronger and stronger. And preventing merchants from, these bad use cases, preventing, risky transactions from going through. I think that's the cornerstone that we have really worked on. See a lot of use cases with Gen AI on that.
Awesome. Amrish, taking off from there, and probably because Pine Lab has done very large-scale deployment in point-of-sale market, digital merchants have an advantage because they start with data first, because it's digital platforms, so customer registrations, transaction monitoring is quite simple compared to physical merchants. But especially Pine Labs have done deep integrations with merchants, both on billing and EMI and things like that. Do you see the same kind of use cases what Anirban spoke about, and probably expand a little bit more about, how do you drive personalization? Because that's one of the things which we hear a lot on the digital side. Do you see that technology like AI can help us do even personalization for physical merchants, or even things like, merchant EMI practically was innovated by you guys at scale. Do you see the driving some of those things super personalized at the merchant level?
So Anurag, what I'll do is I'll first talk about the broad problem statement, and then I do want to take it to an example which is slightly different than classic merchant. So one of the things what we are getting to face every day with the merchant environment is, if we go back and communicate to the merchant that we'll help you run your business more efficiently, they don't have time for us. What they want to hear from us is, how do we make more money in our business? And similarly, the way I'm looking at it is, the bot environment moving to intelligent agents environment, I think that's the point when AI is going to become super interesting to all of us. Because what's really going to happen is, as you move into the intelligent agent world, you're effectively almost democratizing knowledge or intelligence in general. Let me give you one example on it, right? So when you have all of India, which is doing satta on the stock market, on the options, they are losing every day. And what they are losing every day is, they are losing to the best trader on the other side, which could be a Citadel or a Jane Street or somebody else, which are large houses there. The way I see this is, using AI over the next few years, you're almost going to have an equal capability in your pocket to go compete in a very competitive manner in a very complex environment of F&O and F&O trading. And that intelligence will be available with you at all points of time because of AI. So there, the opportunity for the consumer is not really to try and cut cost or to become much more efficient, but effectively make more revenues. And honestly, what we are really trying to work on today in Pine Labs is, I think we've accepted the fact that intelligent bots are going to solve for certain situations and scenarios, but what are the ways in which we can help people make money? And that is exactly what you were referring to. Between, let's say, installment payments to something like an early trade-in to something like an assured buyback, we think the opportunity is a larger opportunity around affordability. And when a consumer comes in to make a purchase, if we can intelligently prompt the consumer what's the best option that the consumer can take, it'll allow us to become more relevant both to the merchant as well as the consumer, help them make more money. I think that's a good deployment of the AI framework as far as we are concerned.
Awesome. One of the biggest use cases we have seen, a rather early adoption, we've seen in many industries, Mahendra, is about using AI to drive automation. And the reason I wanted to ask this question, because you are a commerce and payment play inbuilt, and you get to see both sides, on the consumer sides as well as on the seller side. And when we'll talk about millions of orders being processed on a daily basis, refunds, reconciliations, cancellations, orders. Do you see, are you guys deploying AI in these use cases to drive automation and operating costs down, which can actually bring down experience both for the sellers and the consumers from the traditional means?
Yeah, I'll get to the automation for driving costs down, not just in payments, but overall the fulfillment value chain and e-commerce. But just want to build on the earlier point that Amrish teed up. I think in the consumer journey in commerce, I mean, while we can think about it in e-commerce terms, I think it equally applies in the offline world. And if you ask yourself, how can AI agents really simplify the customer experience of purchasing anything? And if you just kind of break down the decision points that the consumer goes through, firstly, they're trying to figure out what product to buy. Then they're trying to figure out what product goes along with this product. Then they're trying to figure out which payment method should I use to pay for this product. Then they're trying to, in that decision, they're trying to figure out what is the best offer, installment offer, bank offer, etc., that I have on this product. All of that helps them buy the product, then it gets delivered. Now they want to return the product. They want to talk to a customer service agent. Each of these areas have certain degrees of inefficiencies. And I feel that artificial intelligence deployed well simplifies that in many ways. I think people are now familiar with frequently bought together. People are familiar with customers who bought this also bought. So these are all kind of ML and AI techniques, whether it's collaborative filtering, query intent deciphering, that allows you to do that. The same thing then applies in, hey, I have like 5 different credit cards saved in my wallet. Which credit card should I use for this purchase because it's giving me the best offer? Again, there is an AI agent working in the back recommending that. Then when you come on the back end side of, to your point about automation and cost reduction, I mean, as you're familiar, when you're processing millions of transactions every hour, it is not just about processing the payment on behalf of the customer. You have in the back end settling to merchants, working with banks, the refund files, remittance files, and even just the act of processing a payment. I mean, in this country, we still have success rates which are about 1 in every 5 or 6 payments fail. How do you get that intelligence back from the failure reason code that you're getting? Now, today I might have a operations team that is looking at all those reason codes and deciding which processor to route through, which issuer to suppress. But really with AI and ML, what we are able to do is really make more intelligent decisions based on the return reason codes we are getting from banks and processors to then decide what exact actions to take. Because today, manually when you are taking those actions, those are based on certain rules versus really understanding the root cause in real time and reacting to it. Same thing when you think about refunds. I mean, as much as we talk about frauds and abuse on the payment forward leg side, there's equal abuse happening on the reverse leg side. So how do you really decipher intent of a consumer who's asking for a refund and make smart choices? So I think overall, when you analyze the inefficiencies that exist both on the consumer side in terms of their decision making and how you can simplify it, as well as the business's operation and how you can simplify it, I think there's just tremendous opportunity. And not speaking about this purely in the e-commerce context alone, because even in the offline world, the same sort of problems exist. I think with some of the digitization of payments that we have seen over the last many years, I feel taking some of these concepts from the e-commerce world into the offline world and bridging that online to offline divide. So for example, I can walk into a physical store and navigate the selection in that store using my app, which can then tell, hey, if you buy this TV, then you can buy this, whatever, headphone along with it. So I think all those technologies now are available to even smaller merchants in physical stores and can be deployed.
Sorry, considering we are all friends out here, Mahendra, can I ask you a question out of syllabus? But so, one of the things which I've been very intrigued by is you had the web world, you then had the consumer which is going much more into the app, and app is almost like an ecosystem of its own. And then you have, everybody from a Google to a WhatsApp to others which have immense distribution, adding in AI layers for creating intelligence. Do you think consumer experience will go through another change between web world to an app world to something different? Any thoughts on that one? On the backs of AI?
I would say it's already happening without us realizing it in some ways, right? I think today, a lot of consumers in certain categories are not really going to an app or a shopping app to begin their purchase, right? Their decision is influenced through a social media influencer who doesn't really know them, but whose preferences, tastes are decoded through artificial intelligence. Suddenly, like, you start seeing a certain kind of influencer in your feed, not because you know them personally, not because you even had heard about them, but certain information that you are putting out there is helping personalize which influencers you're seeing. I mean, all of us are on the probably the other side of 40s, and I'm sure we are getting targeted by various different lifestyle choices, midlife crisis brands that are out there. So I think it is already happening. Now, whether the form factor will change from a smartphone to something else, I think there is a lot of device evolution that is going on. You're bringing it about in the payments world, and we'll see some of those coming along. But I think it is already getting influenced by.
Good, good, good. I'll come back to it because I have a follow-up question, but I want to bring in Gautam here. And, like one of the reasons why, payments grow at scale because, once they're standardized, it's easier for people to adopt. And networks do a critical job of abstracting a lot of complexity in the back end. And, you just heard from POS-based transactions to e-commerce transactions at a network level because you are driving like thousands of banks so that unified experience can be given to the end consumer and the merchants. What kind of AI innovation Mastercard is driving to do that? And especially because you're not, just bound by India boundaries because the Mastercard experience has to be seamless across the board because cross-border is one of the biggest use cases for network. So how do you see that, evolve?
So, Anurag, that's a great question. So let me start off with maybe saying we have been in this space of AI 10 to 15 years. As a student of AI 25 years ago, I would say AI is now nothing but data analytics, large amounts of data, a lot of processing power, all coming together, making AI really, happen, and making it practically possible. So if I were to give you some numbers of how technology and AI have really impacted payments and how innovation has really impacted payments, about 20 odd years ago, if you were to look at auth rates on card payments, I'm going to talk about, an 85, 86% auth rate was a pretty good number. Yeah. Right? I'm talking about card present, for those of you who understand what card present means. Today, in most advanced economies, well-operating banks do a 97, 98% auth rate. Even in India, we see many banks, private sector banks, in that 97, 98% auth rate. The worst class is still sitting in the 80s, some in the 70s also. Now, the moment you add cross-border, the moment you add contactless, the numbers start, dropping. But the fact is that we have come a long way from that 85% being a good benchmark to a 97, 98% being a benchmark. What has allowed that to happen is back in the day, there were very rudimentary patterns one would search for to be able to call something a potentially fraudulent transaction. As technology has progressed, as we've adopted AI, our ability to identify patterns, our ability to, in real time, change our opinion on patterns has really happened because of what we are calling AI today. And that has allowed us to come to these kind of staggering numbers, right? So therefore, the natural use case in payments has been fraud detection. And then, of course, we have evolved, we have innovated a lot. To give you a sense, think about it. 20 years ago, when you made a payment on a card, there was just a physical card you made a payment on. You went to a store, you made a payment. The only data I had was, okay, some guy XYZ with the card number XYZ went to a merchant which has a merchant ID of ABC and did a transaction for a certain amount. But now, when Mahindra walks in, depending on what he's planning to use, if he's using his phone, there's actually the identifier of the phone being captured, the digital form factor of the payment being captured. His geolocation is being captured. The fact that he's making a payment somewhere is being captured. And there's a lot more information that is going along with that payment transaction. And so there's a lot more the ability to make more decisions. So to give you a sense, today at Mastercard, in real time, we are looking at about 1 trillion. When I say 1 trillion, I mean trillion, the T, trillion data points in real time to determine whether a transaction is potentially fraudulent or not, right? And we're doing it for about 150 billion transactions on a yearly basis. We protected about $40 billion worth of fraud from happening in the last year alone globally. And that is only possible because we have access to global patterns, We're looking at global patterns. We're able to do this pattern recognition all in real time. And for those of you who use cards, it probably takes less than half a second for you to see a authorization to happen, an SMS alert to come to say, you made that payment. All of that happens at a global level because we've been able to do some technology. So that is what we have done in innovation. We're taking that forward from a consumer experience perspective. I think Anirban talked about it a little bit. So today, we are the only global network that processes real-time payments and card networks, right? And what we are doing now with our customers globally is we don't want a consumer, the world that we see, we don't want the consumer to make a choice, debit, credit, UPI, doesn't make a difference. At the end of the day, you want to make a payment. You want to make a payment for a certain transaction. We are saying we're going to use AI to actually determine what is the best payment system to be used, right? And therefore route the transaction either on a card rail or a real-time payment rail or something else that may come in the future. Don't know what that future looks like. But essentially allow consumers to say, I want to make a payment of $5, $10, 5 rupees, 100 rupees, 1,000 rupees, whatever that amount is. And depending on what kind of a transaction it is, what value of the transaction it is, smart routing will happen of how the transaction gets routed. So that's another thing that we are doing. We are doing it in multiple countries where we are able to operate in this multi-network model, if you will.
Awesome. Anirban, you spoke about trust, and trust is super critical for payments because ultimately this is about money, and people need to know if they make the payments reach on time, in secure, safe manner. I just want to double down on that, like just from a practitioner point of view, would you like to say, give an example of a use case where AI is actually being deployed either by PayU or any other example which you are aware of, especially around fraud detections? And it'll be better if you can say how it was done before and now how it is being done, definitely, because that's one area we keep hearing a lot of work is happening by the ecosystem to drive, fraud detection down.
Yeah, look, one example I'll give is underwriting a merchant, right? One of the things payment companies have to ensure is the merchant actually is doing the business they are saying they are doing, right? Many people have lost money when the merchant site is fraudulent, right? Or they're not providing the right goods and services. We would do that underwriting using very well-trained fraud analysts who had rules, who had algorithms, who had those things, right? But now using LLMs, what we have built is you essentially profile the merchant's website and their app in its fullest details, look at all their customer reviews all over the internet, you go through all their pictures and you feed all of that into the LLM. The LLM is pretty accurate in figuring out actually what line of business the merchant is in and is there any conduct risk. Are they going to sell anything that is banned or are they going to do things that are not allowed per Indian laws like crypto or gambling or something, right? All of that just enhances trust in the ecosystem. Think of it how it impacts and expands the economy as well. One side there is more trust and more consumers therefore can trust merchants much more easily. But the other side of it, anybody can be a merchant, right? Over time, if you can trust and verify anybody just based on conduct rather than a lot of documents, you can make anybody a merchant. And therefore, the micro merchant can go digital and can have the same set of tools that a very large merchant can have.
Okay. Good. So I think this is already live.
Yes.
Awesome. I know we all have faced false positive ratios in this area so high, where ultimately most of the fraud detection becomes case management system. So if we can solve this, is quite good use case. Amrish, you spoke about in your previous answer that how same shopper behavior can be used to drive personalized experience at the merchant. But do you see that when you deploy, I'm sure some of this was also being done for POS merchants because they're also equally fraud prone. We all have seen and experienced cases where fuel transactions or grocery transactions are being misused. Do you see that this will drive more frictions for customers? Especially because, when you're sitting in front of the merchant, consumer he has an option to just pay cash. Okay, and all of us are fighting cash at a very, very bare minimum level. So how do you find the balance between a fraud detection in a POS place at the same time offering a frictionless experience for the consumer? Because in a lot of digital places, you have no choice but to use digital payments. But in POS, the situation is very, very different.
Yeah, look, I think when it comes to the POS transaction, I have to say that we are in a fairly easy world. As long as the consumer has identified herself and consumer has the right PIN available to them, our job is to take the transaction and complete the transaction. So honestly, one of the things which I keep saying that when somebody wants to complete the transaction, don't put any intelligence on it, complete the damn transaction. We don't need to interfere in it. However, what we are getting to see some very interesting use cases is, for example, what we are doing in the account aggregator space. So as you know, we own this company called Setu, and Setu is doing a lot of work on the account aggregator side. What we have been able to clearly demonstrate is at least a 15 to 20% improvement in a simple job like labeling. So what we are getting to see is that based on the data which comes through on the account aggregator side, which is being utilized by fintechs, just the labeling activity was, did you actually do that for a food transaction? Was that a transportation transaction? Was that a gift transaction? And so on and so forth. Just labeling of that transaction using AI, we've been actually able to demonstrate almost a 15% improvement. And that 15% improvement is then adding value to the end user in terms of their underwriting activities or their decision-making activities. And it is actually in force being used today in the field. I'm at an event where I shouldn't be talking about other financial institutions. So, but it is currently being used by financial institutions, and they're almost getting to see a 15 to 20% improvement on their labeling activity today.
Awesome. Man, I just want to double down on the previous question which Amrish asked. So I think just want to elaborate. We saw like somewhere in late 90s when the internet started and we all had portal business coming in, and then mobile came in. But for a very long period, there was an overlapping world. And somewhere on, if I talk about Indian context, post 2017, 2018, we start seeing mobile first businesses. Like when we started our company, we had absolutely no website. It was only app business. And I'm sure what example you just gave, that already AI is being infused in commerce and payments to drive shopping performance. Do you see a world, how far we are from an AI first kind of commerce and stroke payment? Because payment has to inbuild along with commerce. The first commerce has to be completely digital, completely AI driven. Probably just a board where people talk and it happens like that. How far are we from there, or are you guys working? I know Amazon spoke about those experiments in US where the fridge will inform how many eggs need to be ordered and things like that. How far are we from the reality from that?
See, I think if I just summarize the paradigm of our interaction that we are most familiar with today when we shop online, is you're used to navigation and you're used to punching in fairly specific search terms of what you want to buy. Like if I want to buy this bottle, I'll say bottle of water, right? Like so you walk with a very clear intent of what you want to buy. And if you have that in mind, then you can either navigate, you can say, hey, men's apparel, shirts, and go there, or you can type in men's polo shirts and go there. I think where the world is moving to, and I think it is launched in India as well. So we have a chatbot assistant called Rufus inside the Amazon app that you can actually have a conversation with, right? And I was just showing this to Amrish on the side there. I was just looking for a travel gift for my wife. I didn't have a very specific gift in mind. I was just like, hey, what travel gift can I give? And incidentally, it pulled out a Make My Trip gift card powered by Quicksilver, so which is what I showed it to him. I said, hey, look, this is already happening, right? And it was not like, I think the assistant was smart enough to recommend a set of categories. It was like, hey, here's a luggage bag, and here's a book on backpacking through Kerala, and here's like a travel gift card. So I don't think I would have had that even thought in my mind that if I'm looking for a travel, like I think it suddenly made it possible to ask a language question, like, can you recommend me a travel gift for my wife?
Wow.
Like that was the question, and these were the set of recommendations that I got, right? Like, so I feel it's already moving into that space. And so the more we almost like deprogram ourselves of doing these spearfishy searches and just actually learning to have a conversation, which is a dying art these days. Right? I think AIs can do a phenomenal job. I think today what has happened is we are just so fine-tuned saying, hey, deliver me a chicken biryani from this restaurant, or deliver me this by whatever, right? So we've been programmed to become very quantitative, objective in terms of how we converse with some of these search boxes that have programmed us over the last 15, 20 years. I think it's time to deprogram ourselves and just have a regular conversation, and it'll spring some interesting results.
You want to say?
No, I was actually looking up the same thing right now. So if you actually looked at the recent announcement by Perplexity around shopping, and they had a very interesting one where you could actually say that, hey, I'm doing a birthday party and I have no clue how to do it. What all do I need? And there are actually responses out there which says you need to buy balloons. Balloons can be bought from so-and-so. You need a clown. These are the 3 clowns which are most used in your locality. And these are the return gifts that you need to buy, and these are the options. And you can go and buy purchases. The interesting thing is, as soon as Perplexity came out with it, Stripe actually came out with commerce-related solutions on top of that instantly. And they said, we've already partnered with them, so you can actually go and complete the payment transaction right then and there. So the question that you are asking is arrived. It's there
Probably
today.
next time you're planning with Shweta's birthday party, it'll also tell you that don't buy balloons. She doesn't like balloons. Okay. Anyway, coming to Gautam, all this is good. We've heard tons of use cases. Life looks good. We all know payment is a deeply regulated area, and data across the country, across the world, how we run model governance, the back end of it, how we use the data, what data we can use. Because even if we do use LLM, we have to be very careful that how much data we are actually feeding in, what portion of the LLM we are using it, has the data been consented by the consumers? How do you see the backend emerging for AI? Because all these use cases essentially ride on, like how we run the backend. It has to be explainable, it has to be traceable. How do you see that? Especially, I'm pointing this question to you because you are running multi-country network, and every jurisdiction will have its own evolving laws around it. So how do you see that happening?
So before I answer that question, I do want to ask Mahindra one thing. Not a question. I was just wondering if I were to ask a system and what travel gift I give my wife, and if I came up with a travel gift card, she's going to shoot me because she's going to say, you were going to pay for my travel anyway. What is this gift card of value to me? So don't buy that gift, man. But to answer your question, there was, I think many, many moons ago when I was running technology of Mastercard, I'd written a bit of a paper on this exact topic, which is we should not be creating data islands, right? So what is happening today, unfortunately, globalization and nationalism is happening at the same time, right? And the regulatory action, I'm not talking about India, I'm talking about globally, regulators are becoming quite concerned about data sovereignty, and data resides in my country. It's happening in India, China, Indonesia, parts of Europe, wherever. The one beauty of our global network was always the fact that we had access to global data, global patterns, and based on which we were able to build decision modeling systems that allowed us to provide the experience, to provide the fraud management and everything that was there. Now, the more and more we start getting into these data islands where, your data has to be protected, you can't really bring one country's data out to the other. If more countries start doing that than what we already have, we could potentially be in this problem of, are we creating, friction in the system? So I think, firstly, what needs to happen is the world needs to come together in that sense to define what does good look like. We need technology companies, we need regulators to come together. Then the second thing that needs to happen is we have to move away from a non-trusting environment in the sense that, people compete on technology, people compete on innovation, we cooperate. There is a term that we've been using called co-opting, right? Which is essentially, there are things that Pine Labs does better than Mastercard. There are things that Mastercard does better than somebody else. We need to start working together. Amrish used the example that Perplexity came up with this idea, and then Stripe is already building. That's exactly what a cooperation model looks like, right? So I think we need to start working well, within the ecosystem, and therefore the data boundaries that you're talking about, I don't think data boundaries in that sense should exist, but data governance, rules should be there. PII is important. I think the one thing that we should all be thinking about is how do we provide all of this keeping, PII in mind. To me, that needs to remain sacrosanct.
Understood. Anirban, you want to add just from a India point of view that because you've already deployed use cases, any tips around what are the basic stuff one has to look after when you're deploying an AI model to solve an actual use case?
From a security perspective?
Yeah, security, safety, privacy, all these topics like, how you have taken the data. And because, a lot of time we actually merge proprietary data with data which is available publicly. How do you just create firewalls and, to actually deploy the use case?
Yes. Look, keep PII out. I think the most important thing is to be very, very careful with PII. Be very clear that everything you do follows the spirit of the regulatory compliance, that is laid out. But avoiding, you don't need PII for anything. You can just anonymize and tokenize that. And then I think most use cases you can solve for within reason.
Awesome.
I have to say, for a fintech panel, it took almost 35 minutes before the regulator word came out.
I know. That is true.
No, I kept it for the last because I want to make sure that everybody remains in their mind. But I just want to add one point and probably open up for questions. We have around 3-4 minutes. Is that as the compute becomes cheaper and at scale, even the traditional AI models can become much better, which we all have been using it for many years in solving actual use cases. So we are also seeing some of those use cases also being deployed by payment companies, where you can improve the efficiency of your, predictive AI models, which we have been using for that. So anyway, we have got 3 minutes. Happy to take any questions. Yeah. Can we get a mic for the gentleman? Yeah.
Question for Amrish. Amrish, since you brought up Setu, I have a question for Setu in particular. I mean, when you bought Setu, it was a fixed deposit aggregator. Just as soon as you bought it, the API pricing went offline. And now I see any information of FD aggregation out. But companies like Airtel Money are getting into that space. So what is your thought? I mean, is it the regulator, the R word, right, creating too much heat that you got out of that space?
Geez, this wasn't part of the syllabus, but I'm still going to answer that one. And slightly long answer, but you asked me a very specific answer, right? Question. The reality is, when it comes to fixed deposit, it is a single transaction, and there are no repeat transactions, and your abilities to make money is extremely limited. And hence, I felt that this is not a business which is a scalable business. It had nothing to do with the regulator. At the end of the day, we are API providers. We create APIs which meet up to business requirements. You deprioritize those APIs which you don't believe are going to be very, very scalable. So we did that. But we went ahead and invested into many new other APIs, which seem to have done extremely well for us over the last 12 years. Over the last 12 months. In the last 24 months, this business has grown 100% for the last 2 years. So, yeah, some good decisions have also happened.
Anyone else? Yeah, please.
So, my question is more of to Gautam and rest of the panel members, is that everybody is trying and talking about fraud prevention, and at the same time, transaction processing, the time of processing is also important, right? So, when a payment processor like PayU or Pine Labs or any other payment aggregator processes the transactions, it is always dependent on, like, to prevent the fraud, there is a front level fraud detection can happen. But at the back end, you all are working with the banks, right? So this kind of syncing between the bank and the aggregator, how AI can solve this problem, right? Because we are sitting at a time when a lot of payment aggregators are bringing a lot of different solutions to process transactions, but at the same time, speed of transaction is very important.
So as I mentioned, a Mastercard transaction is approved generally within 500 milliseconds, and that is after going through almost 1 trillion data points for fraud and other detection. So we do this with our own system and the partner systems in place with the banks. The way we do it is we actually recommend for every transaction, we give a score to the bank partners saying that based on Mastercard's assessment, this transaction has a score anywhere from 0 to 100. That's our range. 100 being not fraudulent, 0 being extremely likely to be fraudulent. And we give them ideas of what the right threshold is where they should decline the transaction. And at the end of the day, we let the banks decide, what they would want to decline versus us making that choice. But I think, I don't think speed is of concern given how things are happening today, at least not in the network world.
I just wanted to add one thing to it. Look, we have to evolve as an ecosystem on the issuing side where we use much more risk-based authentication. That is where I think this whole system will come together and multiple, if you think this is not a usual pattern of transaction for a customer, the OTP could have been phished, right? So you ask for an additional form of authentication, but both that risk-based signaling and then asking for additional authentication, that whole framework has to come in place. I think it's time for that as digital commerce expands.
Yeah. Okay, probably just one last question and we are done.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm from TCS. My name is Ashish. The question is, recently the governor of RBI has announced the introduction of ULI, Unified Lending Interface. And, obviously all of us know that lending is a much more involved activity in terms of underwriting and other activities. So how far is this system ready to introduce something like ULI? And the second question is, will there be UII, Unified Insurance Interface, after ULI? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, hello, yeah. So I think ULI, RBI has announced ULI primarily to drive lending ecosystem on the lines of UPI, where multiple players can participate in that. The good news is a lot of hard work about ULI has been done already by aggregating APIs like account aggregators, authentication of KYC, validations around, like things like PAN, your income verifications and all that. So some of the new stuff like device identification and all that will get added. What we see that the way when UPI, even before UPI, mobile payments were there, but UPI brought standardization payment which allowed multiple players to participate. This is how ULI is being is being thought. We are already using ULI in some form. Many of us are already using. I think from an ecosystem to probably stabilize, I would give 12 to 18 months. RBIH is the nodal body, which is already doing lots of workshops with fintechs and banks so that the adoption can be faster. Coming to UI, by the way, IRDA has set up a separate company called Bima Sugam, which is supposed to be building these API structure for UPI kind of structure, but they still, we haven't rolled out anything substantial to the consumers, to best of my knowledge. But they are actually staffing the company, they're hiring people, and we're hopefully that this will drive, portability, transfer of insurance seamlessly from one insurer to other insurer and things like that pretty soon. Yeah. Thank you. We are already up on the, by almost 4 minutes. So thank you everyone, and thank you for listening us.